Hey guys, today we're diving into another truly horrifying case. If you want to support my channel, make sure to subscribe and stay active. It really helps me out. I'd be super grateful for that. Let's get started. Alexia Daval, née Fouillot, was born on February 18, 1988. She came from a well-respected family that held a solid standing in their community. Her mother, Isabelle Fouillot, was an active member of the local city council and known for her firm values and civic engagement. Her father, Jean-Pierre Fouillot, owned a small café that wasn't just a local gathering spot. It also served as a hub for horse racing enthusiasts. The Fouillot raised two daughters, Stéphanie, the elder, and Alexia, the younger. The sisters were close and deeply supportive of each other. They shared a strong foundation built on family values, respect for hard work, loyalty, and mutual support. Their parents emphasized the importance of integrity, teaching them to pursue goals without compromising their principles. Raised in this stable environment that prized discipline and responsibility, both girls thrived. Alexia, in particular, stood out, not just as the youngest, but as someone seen by her loved ones as reliable and driven. Her vibrant energy, balanced by a strong sense of responsibility, painted the picture of a woman with clear ambitions. Her family admired her determination, seeing in her a living example of how persistence and self-discipline could open doors to a brighter future. Jonathan Daval was born on January 16, 1984, in the small town of Vels, in the Haute-Saône region. He grew up in a large family with 6 children. His mother, Martine Henry, worked as a child caregiver while his father was employed at a factory. But when Jonathan was 13, his father suddenly passed away from a heart attack, a moment that deeply affected him and shaped the rest of his childhood. Jonathan became reserved and cautious. He never sought attention and usually kept to himself. Still, he had one outlet that helped him connect with others: soccer. He played regularly in local amateur leagues, and for years the sport became his primary way of socializing. After high school, Jonathan chose to pursue a career in information technology. Once he completed his studies, he got a job at a tech consulting firm. His co-workers described him as disciplined, reliable, and detail-oriented. He wasn't a natural leader, but he was meticulous and dependable. People saw him as someone who stayed out of conflict and rarely showed much emotion. In the early 2000s, Jonathan met Alexia Fouillot. Their relationship developed gradually, but it quickly became serious for both of them. Alexia, 4 years older, was energetic and assertive. Jonathan, on the other hand, came across as quiet, even shy. But their differences seemed to complement each other. For both, this was their first real, long-term relationship. After several years together, the couple decided to get married. On July 18, 2015, the ceremony took place at the town hall in Gray. The moment carried special meaning as the marriage was officiated by Alexia's mother, Isabelle Fouillot, who was serving as a city council member at the time. The wedding was a major event for the family. The newlyweds spent their honeymoon on islands in the Pacific Ocean. Upon returning, they moved into a house that had belonged to Alexia's grandparents. They renovated the place and began their life together in the newly updated home. From the outside, their married life seemed stable. They worked out together, lived healthily, and often participated in running events. But beneath that image of harmony were growing struggles. Most significantly, their difficulty in starting a family. Jonathan Daval's life appeared to be a steady transition from a quiet teenager in a large family to a man with an orderly adult life. But under the surface of a modest and reliable husband were deep-rooted insecurities and unresolved issues, ones that would later prove central to a tragic chain of events. Saturday morning, October 28, 2017, began like any other for the Daval household. Around 9 a.m., Alexia put on her running gear and headed out for a jog. Her route was familiar, wooded trails around Gray that she knew well, and used regularly for training. Jonathan later said that after she left, he headed to his office where he worked as a technician. For co-workers and anyone who may have seen him that day, nothing seemed out of the ordinary. Hours passed, and the situation began to grow worrisome. Alexia hadn't returned by lunchtime, even though her runs typically lasted no more than 90 minutes. Jonathan started calling her cell phone, but all calls went straight to voicemail. He also tried the home line. No response. With concern mounting, he reached out to family. The first person he called was Gregory Gay, the husband of Alexia's older sister, Stephanie. Jonathan told him that Alexia hadn't come back and wasn't answering her phone. For the family, that was immediately alarming. Alexia was always reachable and never went off the grid without notice. Without waiting for emergency services, Jonathan and Gregory began searching on their own. They drove along the route Alexia usually took on her runs, checking trails, shoulders, and ravines, hoping to spot some trace of her. At the same time, Jonathan kept trying her phone without success. When their search turned up nothing, they began to fear that there had been an accident or a serious mishap. They called local hospitals and emergency departments across the region. The response was the same everywhere. No one matching Alexia's description had been admitted in recent hours. By that evening, when it became clear that the search efforts weren't turning up any results, the family decided it was time to contact the authorities. Jonathan went to the local police station himself and gave a detailed account to the officers on duty. He described the circumstances under which his wife had gone missing, her usual jogging route, the time she left home, what she was wearing, and the fact that she didn't have her phone or ID on her, a detail that seemed very out of character for her. All of this information was officially documented. In the initial hours following the report, law enforcement followed standard protocol. Several theories were considered: an accident during her run, a fall in a hard-to-reach area, or possibly a confrontation with someone dangerous. The idea that she may have left on her own was also noted, but given Alexia's personality and lifestyle, that theory was quickly dismissed. One of the biggest early challenges was the complete lack of physical evidence or clear direction for the investigation. There were simply no leads to indicate where she might have gone. In those first hours, family and friends still held out hope that Alexia may have gotten lost or veered off her usual path and would soon turn up. But as more time passed without any contact or trace of her, the situation began to feel increasingly serious. Everyone close to her realized this wasn't just a delay or a miscommunication. This was a disappearance that required police intervention. This marked the beginning of a chain of events that would move beyond the private anguish of one family. The case became an official investigation, and soon a matter of public concern. The disappearance of a young woman quickly turned into a story that spread beyond the town of Gray. On the morning of Monday, October 30th, 2017, the search ended in tragedy. In a wooded area near the town of Gray, located in the Haute-Saône department, a body was discovered. The location was off the beaten path, rarely used, overgrown, and uneven. It was not the kind of place people wandered into by accident. Officers arriving at the scene noted that the body had been partially covered with branches and leaves, an obvious attempt to conceal it. But the cover-up appeared rushed and careless, as if whoever was responsible didn't have much time. There were signs of burning on both the body and clothing. Investigators quickly concluded that someone had tried to destroy evidence by setting the body on fire, but either the attempt was interrupted or not fully carried out. Forensic experts began examining the scene immediately. They documented multiple bruises, signs of blunt force trauma, and soft tissue injuries. Particular attention was paid to the neck area, where clear marks of strangulation were visible. It became immediately apparent that this wasn't an accident or something caused by nature. They were dealing with the victim of a violent crime. Once official identification was made, the worst was confirmed. It was Alexia Duval, age 29, who had gone missing just 2 days earlier. For her family, this was the moment when hope turned into devastation. The news spread through the small town of Gray and its surroundings within hours. In a close-knit community, word traveled fast. People were shaken. Violent crime of this nature was nearly unheard of in the area. For many, it was unsettling to realize that such brutality could strike so close to home. Local media quickly picked up the story. Regional papers, websites, and news stations reported on the discovery. Within hours, speculation was rampant. The theory of a random attacker emerged early. Journalists floated the possibility that a predatory offender could be involved, with some even suggesting a repeat pattern. On social media, residents exchanged rumors and personal theories, only adding to the growing sense of fear. One detail that drew significant attention from both investigators and local residents was the location where the body was found. The wooded area had long been considered safe and was a popular spot for outdoor activities. People often jogged there, rode bikes, walked their dogs, or took their kids for strolls. But after the discovery, women who were used to running alone in the mornings began to voice a new sense of unease. Conversations among neighbors and co-workers often returned to one unsettling thought. The danger might not have come from a stranger. It could have been someone local. That possibility sparked growing anxiety and mistrust throughout the community. The traces of fire found on Alexia's body and clothing became a crucial element of the investigation. For the forensic team, this indicated that the person responsible hadn't acted impulsively. It suggested a deliberate attempt to destroy evidence. The use of fire seemed like a calculated move meant to obscure the cause of death and erase any potential biological traces. While investigators saw it as an effort to cover up the crime, many locals interpreted it as something far more chilling, a sign of cruelty that made the image of the perpetrator even more disturbing. Once the body was officially identified and confirmed to be Alexia Duval, the investigation shifted gears. What had started as a missing person case was now formally classified as a homicide. Additional police units were deployed to the area where the body was discovered, combing through the surroundings in search of any trace evidence. Investigators collected whatever they could: discarded cigarette butts, scraps of fabric, shoe prints, or any small object that could help piece together what had happened. Several theories were explored. Investigators considered the possibility of an attack by a stranger, a random confrontation that escalated, or a targeted act of violence. Although the list of possibilities was broad, the most likely scenario remained that of an outside attack, an unknown assailant whose actions aligned with the condition of the scene and the physical evidence. The investigation unfolded under intense pressure. In a small town where violent crime was almost unheard of, tension ran high. Residents demanded answers, and local media followed every development closely. A sense of fear and suspicion began to take hold. Women started jogging in groups, and families restricted their children's movements after dark. This marked the end of the uncertain, hopeful phase of the case. Alexia Duval's disappearance was now officially deemed a murder. The case took on the full weight of a criminal investigation, drawing significant attention from both law enforcement and the general public. As the investigation intensified, the public's focus gradually shifted toward Alexia's family. Her loved ones found themselves at the center of a media storm. The horrific discovery in the woods set off a series of events: funeral arrangements, memorial services, and public tributes, all expressions of shared grief and community solidarity. At the forefront of these events was Jonathan Duval, Alexia's husband. He stayed close to her parents, Isabelle and Jean-Pierre Fouillot. At every memorial event, he stood by their side, a fact widely captured by photographers and media crews. He came across as a man deeply shaken, yet determined to honor his wife's memory. Reporters noted his behavior. Articles described him as quiet and reserved, a man for whom his wife had been the emotional cornerstone. In his public remarks, whether addressing neighbors or speaking at the funeral, Jonathan spoke of his love for Alexia, her passion for life, and her dedication to fitness. His tone was subdued, his emotions contained, which only added to the sense of authenticity in his grief. One of the most striking moments came on November 5, 2017, during a memorial march. Around 10,000 people joined the procession, an extraordinary number for a town that size. The crowd walked in silence, many holding photos of Alexia and carrying white flowers. The march became a powerful symbol of collective mourning and unity. Jonathan walked at the front of the procession, side by side with Alexia's parents, cementing his image in the public eye as a grieving husband overwhelmed by loss. At the end of the march, several people spoke. Alexia's parents were first. Isabelle described her daughter as a strong, intelligent woman, while Jean-Pierre expressed deep gratitude to everyone who had supported the family during their darkest days. Then Jonathan took the microphone. His speech, broadcast across numerous TV networks, was deeply emotional. He referred to Alexia as his oxygen, his source of strength and inspiration. His words came across as a heartfelt confession, and many saw in him a man devastated by grief. The media quickly embraced that image. Newspapers ran front-page photos of Jonathan under headlines about love and loss, portraying him as a symbol of strength and resilience in the face of tragedy. To the public, he seemed like the ideal son-in-law and husband, someone who shared in the Fouillot family's sorrow and brought people together in memory of Alexia. After Alexia's body was discovered, investigators immediately began focusing on those closest to her. According to standard procedure in such cases, the spouse is usually the first to be questioned. That's why, just days after the tragedy, Jonathan Duval found himself at the center of the investigation. His initial statements were straightforward and consistent. Jonathan claimed that he had been at work from around 10:30 a.m. that Saturday, fixing a printer, and had no idea where Alexia was during that time. But soon, his story began to unravel. Detectives noticed discrepancies in his timeline, contradictions in the sequence of events, and inconsistencies in the details. Of particular concern were marks found on his body, scratches on his neck and chest, and bite marks on his arms. When asked about them, Jonathan explained that he and Alexia had a disagreement the previous evening, but insisted it ended quickly and had no lasting impact. However, the nature of the injuries suggested a much more intense altercation. Rather than clearing him of suspicion, the alibi Jonathan provided only raised more questions. It was confirmed that he had been at the office that Saturday, but the exact duration of his visit couldn't be firmly established. Surveillance footage and witness statements failed to confirm how long he had stayed, which weakened his credibility. At the same time, investigators thoroughly searched the couple's home. Special attention was paid to fabric and household items. Forensic experts discovered that the bedsheet used to wrap Alexia's body matched a set found in their home. This detail became a key piece of circumstantial evidence, strongly suggesting that the crime may have occurred inside the house and that the body was later transported to the woods. Jonathan's vehicle also came under scrutiny. His work car, which was equipped with a GPS tracking system, became a focal point. The tracker data revealed that the car had been in the vicinity of the location where Alexia's body was later discovered, during the night of October 27 to 28. Even more telling, the tire tracks found near the scene perfectly matched the tread pattern of Jonathan's vehicle. These findings further reinforced suspicions surrounding Jonathan, even though in the public eye he still maintained the image of a grieving husband. The inconsistencies in his story and actions were becoming harder to ignore. Initially, Jonathan had firmly denied using his vehicle the night his wife disappeared. However, analysis of cell tower data, eyewitness reports, and surveillance footage painted a very different picture. For investigators, this marked a turning point. It showed his version of events didn't line up with the objective evidence. At that stage, the investigation hadn't yet reached any definitive conclusions. Authorities were still gathering new evidence, interviewing witnesses, and following up on tips that included the possibility of involvement by a third party. But the spotlight was increasingly focused on Jonathan. The contrast between his public persona and the facts uncovered during the investigation was becoming more pronounced and widely discussed. As the first pieces of evidence pointing toward his possible involvement were presented, Jonathan's position began to shift. During interrogations and in-person confrontations, he started moving away from his original defense. Slowly, he transitioned from complete denial to attempts to shift the blame onto others. During a critical interrogation in January 2018, Jonathan made a startling accusation. He claimed that his brother-in-law, Gregory Gay, was responsible for Alexia's death. He went further, alleging that Alexia's parents, Jean-Pierre and Isabelle Fouillot, along with her sister Stephanie, were aware of this and had conspired to cover it up. These claims directly contradicted his earlier statements and seemed highly implausible, especially since all the case evidence pointed in a different direction. The impact of his statements extended beyond the interrogation room. Within the Fouillot family, they caused deep emotional strain. People who had once welcomed Jonathan as one of their own now heard him accusing their loved ones of a crime. The public, too, was stunned. The man once seen as a symbol of resilience and sorrow was now accusing the victim's family of hiding the truth. Investigators, for their part, maintained a neutral stance. They noted that there was no direct evidence implicating Gregory Gay. All forensic findings and circumstantial clues pointed clearly to Jonathan. His efforts to redirect suspicion were seen as an attempt to deflect pressure and buy time. Given these developments, investigators brought in psychiatric and psychological experts. In-depth evaluations were conducted to better understand Jonathan's contradictory behavior. Initial reports described a personality prone to sudden outbursts of aggression, with underlying hostility and deep-seated insecurity. They noted low self-esteem, emotional repression, and a tendency to bottle up feelings until they erupted in anger. Another group of specialists highlighted his psychological dependence on his mother and an apparent inability to make independent decisions. Reports indicated that he avoided direct conflict in daily life, but under high pressure in private settings, he was capable of sharp and uncontrolled reactions. This profile helped explain his pattern of alternating between confession and denial. Throughout 2018, this instability became a defining trait in Jonathan's behavior. He would sometimes accept the facts presented to him and acknowledge some level of guilt, only to later retract those admissions and again place blame on Gregory or even the entire Fouillot family. Investigators saw this as a tactic meant to stall the process, reduce pressure, and muddy the waters. For the family, though, it felt like a deep betrayal, an attack on their character and dignity. People who had stood beside him at memorials now watched as he openly cast suspicion on them. Public perception of Jonathan shifted completely. From that point forward, his strategy of denial began to backfire, intensifying both legal and social pressure. By the end of 2018, the investigation into Jonathan Duval took a decisive turn. The mounting weight of evidence became overwhelming, and for the first time, he admitted to playing a direct role in Alexia's death. On November 23rd, he stated that during the night of October 28, 2017, an argument between him and Alexia escalated into a physical struggle. According to his account, the conflict started over a refusal to be intimate, then turned into shouting and pushing. He claimed he lost control and ended up strangling her with his hands. This marked his first formal admission of guilt. However, just days later, he once again changed his story. During court proceedings in December, Jonathan shifted the blame back onto his brother-in-law, Gregory Gay, insisting that it was Gregory who had lost control and caused Alexia's death. This version contradicted his own previous confession. To Alexia's family, these repeated reversals felt like deliberate distortions of the truth. On December 7th, 2018, a face-to-face meeting was arranged between Jonathan and the Fouillot family. Under pressure and during a direct conversation with Alexia's mother, Jonathan broke down. When shown a photograph of Alexia, he stopped denying the facts and admitted that he alone was responsible. A critical moment in the investigation came on June 17, 2019, during a crime scene reenactment. Conducted early in the morning to mirror the conditions of the original event, Jonathan walked investigators through his actions step by step. He admitted to punching his wife between 5 and 10 times in the face before strangling her with his hands. Later, realizing he needed to hide the body, he transported it to the woods and attempted to burn it in an effort to hinder identification and eliminate evidence. These revelations drastically shifted the view of what had occurred. While he had previously portrayed the incident as a tragic accident, the new details revealed a deliberate sequence of violent actions: assault, suffocation, the intentional disposal of the body, and the attempt to destroy evidence. In the summer of 2019, new psychological evaluations were added to the case file. Specialists diagnosed Jonathan with a personality disorder characterized by obsessive traits, a need for control, and ritualistic behavior. Some experts also noted issues of psychological impotence, which had contributed to escalating marital tension. Alexia had expressed a strong desire to start a family, but difficulties conceiving became a recurring source of conflict. In their messages, she accused Jonathan of failing to address the issue. He, in turn, blamed her for being overly demanding. By the end of 2019, Jonathan's defense had completely unraveled. His repeated confessions, the reenactment, and expert analysis all supported the conclusion that this was not an accident. It was a series of intentional actions aimed at concealing the truth. Jonathan Duvall's trial began in November 2020. The court proceedings took place under public health restrictions. Transparent dividers were installed, seating was limited, and attendees were spaced apart. The jury consisted of 6 people, 5 women and 1 man. The trial was fast-paced, with consecutive days filled with witness testimony and expert analysis. On the first day of the trial, the court laid out the full scope of the charges, the intentional taking of a spouse's life. The presiding judge read through the key findings of the investigation and listed the various versions Jonathan Duvall had given over time, from outright denials to eventual confessions. The defendant acknowledged responsibility for Alexia's death, but continued to describe the incident as a fight that got out of control. Next, expert testimony was presented. The forensic pathologist detailed the nature of Alexia's injuries and confirmed that there were no signs of sexual aggression after her passing. Psychiatrists concluded that while Jonathan did not suffer from any condition that would make him legally unfit, his personality traits and built-up emotional strain posed a clear criminological risk. On the second day, Alexia's parents took the stand. They demanded full clarity about the motives and sequence of events leading to their daughter's death. At the following hearing, Jonathan testified. He became physically unwell at the beginning of questioning, but continued after a brief pause. He admitted that he understood the deadly consequences of his actions when he tightened his hands around her neck. The defense argued that it was an outburst during a moment of marital conflict, without premeditation. Witnesses, including friends and colleagues, spoke about the contrasting personalities in the marriage: Alexia, energetic and assertive, and Jonathan, withdrawn and reluctant to engage in difficult conversations. The ongoing stress around their attempts to conceive a child also came up. These dynamics helped paint a picture of their home life, but the court repeatedly emphasized that none of it excused the severity of what had been done, or the attempt to hide it afterward. By the end of the trial, emotions inside the courtroom were at a breaking point. During the final hearing, Alexia's mother, Isabelle Fouillot, once again asked Jonathan to recount everything in clear, specific detail, step by step. At that moment, Jonathan dropped to his knees and asked for forgiveness, though he offered no new information. The prosecution called for a harsh sentence, citing the totality of evidence pointing to intent. The Fouillot family did not demand the maximum penalty. They asked, instead, for a full and unambiguous admission of guilt. On November 21, 2020, the verdict was delivered. The jury found Jonathan Duval guilty of the intentional killing of his wife. He was sentenced to 25 years in prison with a mandatory minimum of 12.5 years before eligibility for early release. The defense chose not to appeal, and Jonathan was immediately transferred to begin serving his sentence. That marked the conclusion of the public phase of the case. The court had determined legal responsibility, and the community had its answer to the question of who took Alexia's life. While civil matters remained, the criminal proceedings had ended, with a confession supported by evidence and a sentence reflecting the gravity of the crime. After the verdict, civil claims followed. Alexia's parents sought financial compensation for emotional suffering and material loss. The initial request was nearly €379,000. Jonathan's defense considered the amount excessive and countered with an offer of approximately €165,000. In June 2022, the Court of Appeals upheld his conviction and finalized the compensation at €160,000. At the same time, the family made the decision to move on from places tied to the past. The couple's former home was sold, as was Jean-Pierre's family cafe. The funds were redirected toward new ventures and to support their older daughter and grandchildren, a step toward closing a traumatic chapter and focusing on the future. The story of Alexia Duval's murder spread far beyond the small town of Gray. It became part of a national conversation in France about domestic violence. Every new development in the investigation and trial was covered in the media, sparking responses from human rights organizations and calls for public action. Memorial marches and vigils held in her name became powerful symbols of society's commitment to protecting women from violence in the home. Thanks for watching, everyone. Your support means a lot to me, and you can help my channel grow by hitting that like button, dropping a comment, and sharing this video. Your engagement really makes a difference. See you soon.